Welcome to Scary Stories, Real or Written. If you listened to the first episode and decided to come back for more, thank you and welcome back. If you're new here, here's how this works. Each video contains a few different stories. It might be a real story from my own life, or a true story from a submission, or it might be a completely fictional story that I or someone else wrote. Some stories could even be a sweet blend of both. Your job as the listener is, as you're listening to the story, I want you to try and guess to yourself whether this story is real or written. Once we've reached the end of all the stories, I will go back to each story individually and reveal the answers. Let me know in the comments whether you guessed right or wrong and why you guessed what you did, or whatever your thoughts are. Now, without further ado, please enjoy the following questionable tales. I was in the army in my younger days. I have traveled to a lot of places and seen many strange yet wonderful things, all of which have a reason for why they are and where, what, or how they are. But I have no rhyme or reasoning for what I saw practically standing on my porch the night of January 25th, 2013. It was about 5 or 10 minutes past midnight, and I was sitting at my desk in the living room, quietly playing a video game online in the dark after my wife and 2 daughters had already gone to sleep for the night. Eventually, it came to my attention that I really needed to use the bathroom. Now, just right quick for added context, let me explain to you a bit about the way my house is set up. The desk I was sitting at is to the right of the front door, only about a foot away from it. The front door itself has this skinny little window built into it that's about 4 or so inches wide by about 2.5 feet tall. In addition to the desk and the front door, to the left of the front door is a short hallway, and down this hallway on the left is where the bathroom is. So, as I got up out of my chair and passed by the front door to make my way down the hall, something, I'm not sure what, caught my attention. I turned to look out the window of the door, which I have a habit of doing anyway, and I saw the thing. I call it the thing because I'm still not quite sure what I saw, but I do know for a fact what I think I saw. The thing in question looked kind of like a real-life Captain Caveman. It was absolutely covered in what appeared to be dark brownish to black hair, had basically no neck as far as I could tell, and abnormally long arms. I'll be honest, I couldn't really see any facial features because of all the hair. The hair on his body and arms meshed together so well, it really did look like an overgrown cousin It from the Addams Family. Keep in mind, also, I have several streetlights nearby the house, and when the moon is out, even when there are clouds in the sky, I can still see the front yard pretty well, so I know it wasn't a shadow. It was way too solid, and it wasn't haze built up from the cold outside because I hadn't opened the door yet. Now, let's get back to the thing. As I stood there, quietly observing, I began to do some math in my head. I stand around 5 foot 8 inches tall, so I figured from the floor I'm standing on to the bottom of my chin is really close to 5 feet. From the bottom edge of my door to the ground outside is right at 3 feet. It looked to me like the thing was at least up to my chin. and to the top of its head, I'm roughly figuring this thing was at least 8 feet tall. My steps are 4 foot wide from handrail to handrail, and this thing was as wide as my steps. It looked as though it were bent over slightly, as if it were trying to look in the door, but it was standing at the bottom of the steps on the ground, so I can't be 100% sure what it was doing. Finally, it occurs to me that I need to grab my camera and try to get a picture of this thing, if at all possible. Because who the heck is going to believe me otherwise? I turned away long enough to grab the camera, which was on the other side of the desk, about 4 feet away from the door, along with my monitor, keyboard, etc. By the time I find my camera, grab it, and look back, it's gone. I took a good long look out the window into the yard, turned my porch light on, and still see nothing. I then decided to slowly open the front door to get a really good look, and still nothing. It's as if this thing has completely vanished. Definitely relieved, but also oddly disappointed somewhat, I closed the door and at long last made my way to the bathroom. Once I came back and sat down at my desk again, I heard a series of deep rumbling, growling sounds coming from somewhere outside, but I knew it wasn't thunder. Now, let me remind you, I have served in the military. At another point in my life, I was also an EMT. I also used to go hunting for deer fairly regularly, and my eyesight is 20/20. With all that in mind, I can assure you I have seen many wonderful and terrible things, but none of these things were even remotely close to whatever that thing was creeping around the outside of my house at midnight in the dead of winter. And I can safely say, I hope to never see it again. I'm going to start this story off with a bit of backstory for added context. About 5 years ago, I told my friend's dad that I was actively looking for a place to live, and he informed me that there had just so happened to be a mobile home for sale in his and my friend's neighborhood. I told them that sounded great and to tell me a bit more. The house was within budget, the lot rent was super cheap, looked great at least from the outside, and there was a completely empty lot beside of it, so I would have a good amount of my extra yard space compared to everyone else. Add all that to the fact that I knew I had people living close by who I knew I could trust, and needless to say, I was definitely interested. Unfortunately, very shortly after the buying process was done and I was able to access the inside of it, I very quickly discovered I may have made a poor decision. Folks, listen. Never buy a house without giving it a thorough look through on the inside first. Because turned out, I had accidentally purchased an abandoned hoarder house that was halfway falling apart. Oh well, too late to back out now. Besides, I have a background in cleaning and organizing, love a good challenge, and other than going to work, I had literally nothing or anyone else to do with all my spare time. And so, my friend's dad and I began the great project from hell, alternating doing what we could to salvage what we could, and I just decided that I would continue living where I had been living before buying said great project from hell, and would actually move into it once it got closer to being actually livable, which took months, and ultimately I ended up moving in well before I realistically should have. I can go deep into all the finer details of everything and the absolute hell this mobile home in question put me through, but that's worthy of being its own separate story entirely. After several months of cleaning and doing what I could to get the place actually functionally habitable, I decided to rescue a 4-month-old puppy from my grandmother's maniac of a neighbor. In a matter of a few months, I had gone from living by myself in a lovely, very clean little duplex with not a thing in life to worry about, aside from working full-time, to living in a potential death trap of a mobile home with a puppy who desperately needed to learn some potty training so she would quit peeing all over my flooring literally while I'm installing it. With that being said, I took her out all hours of the day and night. I remember one night I took a break from painting to let her outside via the sliding glass door on the back side of the house. I put her leash on, opened the door, and she absolutely refused to step outside. Matter of fact, she actually started walking backwards until she bumped into the fridge and sat down and froze. This tiny dog, who normally weighed barely a pound, suddenly was like trying to drag a block of cement on a leash. I tried taking her out the front door by picking her up and carrying her, but as soon as I opened the front door, she started kicking backwards against my arm, again displaying her reluctance to go outside. And as much as I didn't want to admit it, I agreed something somewhere felt off. As if something out there in the dark, something nefarious, was watching and observing and didn't want to be interrupted while it did so. As I decided to relent for the time being, I sat the pup down and she immediately released a massive puddle of pee. I couldn't even be mad. I cleaned up the mess and decided to make sure all the curtains were closed and decided to call it an early night. The next day, I brought up what had happened the night before to my friend's dad in case he had any ideas, thoughts, or theories as to what might have caused my dog's reaction and that unsettling feeling last night. Well, honestly, around here, it could be almost anything. I know there's a cat with an attitude that likes to crawl up under your porch sometimes. Actually, your crawl space is basically the neighborhood cat's hangout, he laughed. Whatever this was, it definitely wasn't a cat, unless that cat was sent by Satan himself. It felt almost evil, I replied. Well, I'll be honest, he began. This is a really weird area. There's a haunted cemetery up the road a bit, and some other things that during certain times of the year like to pass through here. But this isn't quite the right time of year for that. So, all in all, I really don't know. A haunted cemetery, you say? I asked. Okay, definitely want to check that out soon. But what are the other things you mentioned? Well, he hesitated. How do you feel about Bigfoot? He asked sort of timidly, most likely assuming I'm about to tell him he's crazy. Bigfoot? There's a Bigfoot around here? I shouted in disbelief, but not a bad disbelief, just in a this is definitely not what I thought you were getting at kind of way. Yeah, they seem to have some sort of migration pattern where they pass through here, usually midwinter till real early spring, but mostly winter. And they stink, smell like raw sewage and rotten leaves. I want to see the Bigfoot, I exclaimed. Between this and the cemetery, I was getting hyped. No, you don't. Trust me. And whatever you do, don't take the puppy out after dark, especially not in winter, he stated. I decided to leave it alone for now, and for a good long while, I stopped taking the puppy out after dark, even though more often than not, by in the morning, I had a mess to clean up. Eventually, as the weeks and months wore on, I more or less quit caring about the weird situation that had happened that one night and was very fed up with picking up pee in the morning and decided to, once again, try letting the pup out after dark. One Friday night in December, about 11:30 p.m., I put the pup on her leash, turned on the flashlight on my phone, and out we went. We made our way down the front porch steps and crossed the yard to the long, mostly dirt path that stretched all the way from the main road to the end of the mobile home park and began walking in the direction of the main road. One of the neighbors sat on his front porch, smoking a cigarette. "You're brave, aren't ya? Walking around out here this late," he yelled in my direction. "Well, you're out here too, aren't you?" I replied. "That's different. I'm just taking a quick smoke break right outside the door. You be careful," he warned. I told him I wouldn't be out long and to have a good night. A few more minutes of walking, and I'd reached the entrance of the mobile home park and the main road. I looked around and, other than the houses behind me, could see nothing but woods in every direction I looked. It came to my attention how quiet it was out there. Not a single sound. Not the usual crickets chirping, frogs croaking, nothing. And wow, was it dark. Yes, there were lights outside of a couple of the houses behind me, but looking straight ahead was like staring into the void, if the void was made up of trees. Beginning to feel a little unsettled about all this dark, silent stillness, I started to turn around, and then I heard the grunt. A long, low grumble that sounded like the kind of sound a gorilla would make. I whipped my head around in the direction of the sound, and I could have sworn I saw something move at the edge of the tree line. I quickly snatched the pup up in case I decided to make a run for it, and before turning on my heels and running like hell, took one last look. There to the left, probably about 50 or so feet away, an extremely large shadow figure stepped out from the shrubbery. As I said before, it was extremely dark, so I couldn't make out any real detail. But my God, it was at least 1.5 times my height and almost 3 times as wide, and I could almost make out what appeared to be a very long and very thick arm hanging off to one side. Now, I have never been a runner by any means, but when I tell you I was running, it took about 3 minutes to walk from the house to the road, and I'm fairly certain I threw myself up the front steps and tore open the front door, all in just a couple of seconds over 1 minute. Still clutching the poor pup for dear life, I heavily contemplated as to whether or not I should attempt to barricade the door. However, After taking about 30 seconds to catch my breath and coming to the conclusion that the giant mystery entity had apparently decided against chasing me down and consuming me whole, I decided against it. Though it was definitely another couple of hours before I finally decided to call it a night and go to bed. And believe me when I tell you, under absolutely no circumstances did I ever step a single toe outside of that house past even so much as sunset again. So, what do you think? Are these two Bigfoot stories based in nothing but 100% pure truth? Nothing but pure lies? Or a nice little blend of fantasy and reality? Well, what if I told you that these two stories actually go hand in hand? Because truth be told, the main character from the first story, who saw something standing around the outside of his house post-midnight, is actually the true, real-life encounter of the friend's dad, who is also mentioned in our second story on this episode. Remember how in the second story, the narrator had asked her friend's dad about what might have been outside their house that one night? And the guy told her that it might have been a Bigfoot, but probably wasn't? Yep, our first story tonight was 100% his real story, written in his own words, that he had shared with Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization back in the winter of 2013, and he gave me permission to share his story with you all. Now, the second story is also heavily based in reality, but is not entirely true. But it is based on my own real life. The whole first 2/3 of the story is completely true, with buying the house and having my friend's dad to help me, and that really weird happening with the dog one night and the conversation that followed the next day. But when it gets to the part where I go on a walk and actually meet the Bigfoot, all of that was just written fiction. Though I have seen the plaster cast of the footprint taken by Keith, my friend's dad, from his own encounter. So, did you guess either of the stories right today? If you did, I'm proud of you, and I hope you will subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so that every week you can have fun guessing more brand new but questionable stories. If you want to submit a story of your own, regardless of how real or written it may be, go to the channel's description and look for the link, and from there, you can fill out the form and send it in. I look forward to hearing from you whenever you're ready, and I hope you look forward to hearing from me again next week.